Good morning, Vivek. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great because the Browns are 2-2 and the Bengals are 1-3. I know you've been busy, but did you see the opener? I just want to know if chaos is a good thing in the Bengals huddle because it looked that way to me.
I have to be honest. I've been disappointed in watching the score of the Bengals, but I've been in near campaign events every time, so I have probably for the better not been watching the Bengals languish. I do think that the comfort of Joe Burrow's comfortable contract probably has not been a great force for good to kick this off, but I'm counting on him getting back on track.
Okay, you be an optimist. Yesterday, you said a little chaos in the caucus is not a bad thing. One of the things that stands out, and I think appeals to people about you, is that you want to radically cut the federal government. And I am all with you. If you can take care of the DOE and get rid of it, Department of Education, get rid of it, great. But you need majorities in the House and the Senate to do that via reconciliation. How does chaos in the House get us majorities?
Well, I want to say two things about that, Hugh, because you did make an assertion there that I have a different point of view on about actually the executive's power under limited circumstances to shut down redundant government agencies. I gave an extensive speech at the AFPI about this a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and I can come back to that. But broadly, my point is there may be a silver lining as well. Right now, I think the Republican Party for too long has focused on the question of the who. Donald Trump or somebody else, Kevin McCarthy or somebody else, heck, Ronna McDaniel or somebody else. There was a period of that too. Without asking the question of the what and the why. What do we actually stand for as a party? Why do we actually stand for it? And I think if we answer those questions with clarity, then the question of the who becomes that much clearer in every one of those positions. And so what I see in these personnel disputes that frequently are popping up in the Republican Party is that they're symptoms of a deeper disagreement or sense of being lost about what this party stands for and ought to stand for. So I think we should talk more about the $33 trillion national deficit, how big we want the national debt, how big we want the administrative state actually to be. Do we believe in incremental reform or do we believe in large-scale shutdown? For my part, I've offered a clear plan for how to, A, reduce the federal employee headcount by 75%, how to use executive authority to do it. One of the limitations that they said limited Trump was the civil service protections, which say you can't fire individual civil servants. That's true, but reading the law carefully, those limitations do not apply to mass layoffs. They say the president typically can't shut down government agencies. That's true, but under limited circumstances, the president can, looking at certain unexpired sections of the 1977 Reorganization Act that say if it's to promote economy or to promote efficiency or to reduce redundant government agencies, then under those limited circumstances, the president does have the authority to shut down redundant government agencies. And so I've offered detail, I think, at a level that is probably unprecedented in recent history, and how we're going to shut down and reorganize that administrative state. That, I think, needs to be the top priority. Other Republicans may feel differently, so be it. But let's have the debate on the substance. And then I think once we've aligned on what our agenda actually is, what we stand for, the what and the why, I think we'll stop bickering so much over the who. And that's where I'm coming from.
Now, Vivek, it's an interview, not a debate, but I have to note for the audience, I don't agree with your interpretation of the statute. I was general counsel and director of the Office of Personnel Management under Ronald Reagan, and I know the authorities of the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, and you cannot do what you propose to do, but that's your argument. You can make the argument. I don't want to have an argument with you. I want to get to the thing that you didn't get to answer. I want to get to the debate, the last debate. They were very unfair to you. Because I want to quote here, Tim Scott said you were just in business with the CCP. Governor DeSantis said everyone knew you did business in China. Nikki Haley said everyone knew that you had ended your relationship right before you ran. Would you lay out in detail and take as much time as you want the business relationship between your companies and Chinese companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that I was also disappointed in the way that debate was handled. I mean, really, I don't think it served the viewers or voters of this country to have four people from both sides piling on during, particularly ended up being a lot during my speaking time, where the viewers can't even discern what four different people are saying, shouting like children. And so I appreciate the chance to have a civil discussion. I actually did refer to this in my first book, Woke Inc. I got to my views in part as a product of, I would think most people do, as a product of their experiences. So in my first business, Roivant, the company that I founded, led a business that opened a subsidiary in China at a time when other pharmaceutical companies, technology companies, heck, most major American businesses were expanding into the Chinese market because that was viewed as a potential new market opportunity. However, unlike those other businesses, I quickly realized that there were serious limitations to doing business in China. And in my time as executive chairman at Roivant, led Roivant out of China as the risks of doing business in China became more apparent. Then when I started my next business, and I became probably, you could look at the Fox News to TV hits for the last several years, became probably the most outspoken critic of companies expanding into business in China and the US government's policies on it, probably of any major CEO in this country. Then when I went on to found my next business, Strive, to compete directly with the likes of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard in the asset management space, I made a day one commitment that no major US asset manager has made to say that we would never do business in China. Because I believe that you cannot be a good fiduciary as an asset manager if you have the boot of the CCP on your neck. You can't vote your proxies for US shareholders in ways that don't take that business interest into account. Take BlackRock. They actually expanded into the Chinese market with their mutual fund business, but only after, and the Wall Street Journal documented this, they effectively did a lot of informal lobbying for favorable listing standards for Chinese companies in the US. I didn't want to face that, and that's exactly why when I started Strive, we made that unique commitment that we wouldn't do business in China. And
no,
so
Vivek, I want to go back, though.
My insight. And I want to just point out one more thing since you mentioned this. It is a special irony that many of those other governors, Nikki Haley included, have courted Chinese companies to make investments in their own states. In Nikki Haley's case, calling China our great friend during her time as UN ambassador. So I think it's rank hypocrisy amongst a class of professional politicians. I wouldn't expect much more of people who've grown up in traditional politics, but that's the truth of the matter. But in any case, I think we should be having a legitimate debate on the substance rather than devolving into cheap personal attacks, which is what I tried to do on that debate.
And that's why I want to go back to facts, Vivek. Roivant entered into something in 2014 called CITIPE, an arm of the Chinese government. Subsequently, you started a new company, Sinovant, with them, and then Cytovant with them. Did you go to Beijing during this period, 2017, 2018? Were you there?
I spoke at a conference there. I went there a couple of times, just like many American CEOs.
Give us the details, if you will, of how much time you spent in Beijing and how much money went into these two subsidiaries.
Sure. So, I mean, this is dated back a while ago, Hugh, and so I don't have the exact.
I know we're not going to hold you to it. You're not going to get sued by the SEC. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but and I'm not part of the business anymore either. And so, people can, if they want to speak on behalf of the business, talk to the business. I'm not tied to them. But when I was CEO, yes, we went and explored opportunity to see every major pharma company was talking about the frontiers of China. Same for other technology companies and other industries. For Roivant, it was no different. Opened a subsidiary to develop drugs for the Chinese market, just as we were in other geographies. But in China, there were supposedly reforms to allow companies to more sensibly develop drugs, actually took investment from local Chinese venture capital. Pretty much like everybody else who would come inbound to the Chinese market, you do it through JVs. Whatever the industry is, pharma included, that's how it's worked. I spoke at a conference in Beijing. They wanted my perspectives from the West. I gave that to them. I think it was in Beijing or Shanghai, I don't remember. Made a couple of trips. And you know what? You put somebody who was a developer, I think from Novartis, was the lead person who had worked at Novartis and Roche and a number of other companies in China, said put that person in charge of developing these medicines. Now, the reality is things didn't actually prove all that promising. I mean, there was a lot of regulatory red tape. There were a lot of reasons it was unattractive to do business there. The company never ended up making any profit from those Chinese subsidiaries. While it became apparent to me, and the environment in China also changed over the last decade, became apparent there were serious risks to any business in the West doing business in China. So Roivant went in a different direction. Still, while I was on the board and executive chairman, pulled out gradually from China, has no active operations there today. I moved on in my journey. I wrote Woke Inc. and then started my new business, became far more vocal about what I saw the larger companies doing in China, from Apple to BlackRock to Nike to others, that really concerned me. I've laid this out in depth in the books that I've written, Hugh. I can talk about it here too.
Well, what I want to get to is I think it's legitimate.
Strive, we then made that commitment.
I think it's a very legitimate argument to say, I went, I learned, I left. But I want to know how much money went into the joint ventures. Do you remember how much money in American dollars Beijing put into the two ventures?
I don't remember to the exact amount, but my guess is it was, it was in the millions of dollars, right? It was not in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but it was in the millions of dollars. But it was to start up, drug development's an expensive sport, but it was within the norms of what you would expect to start drug development projects. It ended up being, there was a person from Roche who had previously been at Novartis. These are top experts in drug development and multinational companies doing exactly what multinational companies were trying to do in China, bring competent people to develop drugs potentially for the Chinese market. And you know what? It turned out to be a bad idea for a lot of reasons. And I did what many other American CEOs didn't do in leading that business to close its Chinese operations during my time as executive chairman. Then, when I started my next business, made a clear decision based on my experiences. It's exactly how you would want leaders to lead, I think, Hugh, is learn from those
agree with that. Last question on Beijing.
Contrary.
Were you aware at the time that you went, businessmen often aren't, of the surveillance apparatus and the ability to hack, bug, and put malware into everything you walk around with and carry with you for the rest of your days? Were you aware of that?
I was not as aware of it as I should have been, Hugh. But the truth is, I learned from my experiences. Over time, traveling to China, we would take different phones and laptops just for, by the second trip I went there, that was one of the eye-opening experiences for me, too, in realizing the depth of those risks. I hadn't been focused on China, but I did learn over time about the risks of doing business there. And I think that those are risks that American businesses should not take. And more importantly, the U.S. government needs to recognize that U.S. businesses in many cases are vulnerable in ways that leave Americans vulnerable. When I read about
that brings me to
Airbnb
Hunter Biden.
Those years.
That brings me to Hunter Biden. One of the problems with the Hunter Biden traveling with the then vice president to China is that he's compromised, and people believe that. Do you believe, even though you may not have heard from them, that there's anything you said or did in your trips to China, I gather at least two, that compromise you in any way being president of the United States?
Absolutely not. And I think the difference with Hunter Biden is he was selling off his family name to, that was, I think, corruption of a high rank order. The fact of the matter is many U.S. business, pretty much every major U.S. business leader, Hugh, has traveled to China in some way. And some of them may have made promises to the CCP as conditions for being able to do business there. I was just bringing up Airbnb, who hands over U.S. user data as a condition for expanding to the Chinese market. In my case, we started to expand and look at whether we wanted to develop drugs in China, ended up being flashing red signs everywhere. Couple of years later, exited the Chinese market and made commitments never to go back. That's exactly how I did it. And yes, I do believe I have a deeper understanding of this than most traditional politicians. And it's why I have been, quite likely, Hugh, you can look at my track record on this in the last few years, the most vocally outspoken CEO in the U.S. about the risks of doing business in China.
I think that's fair.
That's
fair. I want to move to TikTok. Again, you got talked over. The debate rules I did not particularly care for. The RNC doesn't run the debate rules. The hosts run the debate rules. You got talked over. Something about a TikTok video. I am on the war path against TikTok and have been for 4 years. It should not be allowed in the United States. It ought to have been banned. I lobbied Secretary Pompeo. They almost got it done. Why are you using TikTok, Vivek?
So I've actually been, first of all, as a policy matter, very clear that kids under the age of 16 should not be using algorithmic addictive social media. And so I have strong views on this that overlap with yours, Hugh, and I've been vocal about that. But I also have a radical idea for the Republican Party. We have to win elections within the system that we have in order to have a chance of implementing those policies. And so, yes, initially my view was stay away from this platform for all kinds of reasons. But then you look at the fact that Democrats are winning the youth vote 3-1. Many young people across this country, like it or not, young voters are on TikTok. You also look at the Chinese version of TikTok. What are they doing? They're actually over there teaching math and engineering. Here it's really crap content that permeates TikTok. Is there an opportunity to reach people with substance, reach young people with actually content that is edifying rather than the really regrettable content they're getting through TikTok today. And my view is, so long as those rules are played the way they are, Republicans need to compete to reach young people with positive messages where young people actually are, unlike Democrats who are doing the same thing rampantly. And I do think it's hypocritical. I mean, there was a certain irony even on that stage. One of the people who was trying to signal her virtue about not being on TikTok and warning Republicans about the importance of not being on it, that's Nikki Haley. Her own adult daughter is regularly on it and posting. You might want to take care of it in your own family before you're preaching about it to others. But it just highlights the way in which, yes, we have some real issues in the country. But if we want to fix that country, we're going to have to reach young voters where they are, convince them of the merits of our ideas. That's how we're going to reach this nation forward. And Hugh, I have some special responsibility here as the young person in this race. As the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican, we already have been, even long before I joined any social media, we have been reaching young people with this message. What are we seeing in this campaign? 40% of the donors to my campaign, of the six-figure donors we have, are first-time ever donors to the GOP. That number is 2 to 4% for traditional Republicans. I think this is an opportunity for us with a powerful message to inspire and uplift the next generation of young Americans who are hungry for leadership, but they're not just watching. In fact, most of them are not watching cable news or traditional news media or radio.
No, they're not.
Reach them with our positive.
Vivek, would you explain to people, though, what does TikTok, in your view, do with the data that they accumulate from users' phones?
So the truth is, none of us know for sure, but we have to be very cautious in the face of not knowing exactly. So I'll be frank with you, and I want to set an example for other people, too. There's a different phone that when I use TikTok, I don't want them, especially as a candidate running for U.S. president. No way. There's a special phone that we're using just for TikTok. That's my responsibility to be cautious, especially as somebody who's in the profile and the position that I'm in. But the other thing, Hugh, is we have to be eyes wide open to the fact that this applies to any company with an app that's also doing business in China.
Yes, it does.
Take the Airbnb example earlier.
Yes, it does. You're right.
We have to be worried about any company turning over U.S. user data to the CCP as a condition for doing business there, whether or not there's Chinese ownership of that app. And I'll also observe that probably 2, 3, 4 of the top 15 to 20 apps in the App Store at any given time are Chinese apps as well. And so are there risks with TikTok? Absolutely. But we also have to be careful to make sure that we don't just exclusively focus on that risk when, in fact, this risk runs rampant in the United States today. And
I want to move to the Navy, Vivek. Are you still using TikTok today in that separate phone?
So I am not using TikTok on my phone. My team has a separate account that posts specifically educational content that reaches young people. And yes, I think that so long as the Democrats are playing this game and reaching young voters, Republicans have to use every way in our arsenal, every way, showing up on college campuses, something that I do uniquely as well. I think that we do need to do a better job of reaching young voters where they are.
Again, I remind not an argument, it's an interview. Last subject. I talked to Governor DeSantis yesterday about the Navy shipbuilding program, so I want to ask you about yours. What are your goals in the first term, the second term, and long term for the U.S. Navy ship count and mix?
So look, I think that broadly, I want to pull back from the divest to invest program, where right now, if we're going to hit that nadir in 2027, 2028, right now that intersects with the peak of the danger window, I would say, for China looking at potentially invading or annexing Taiwan. I would want to smooth that out such that we're not just decommissioning ships, but we're actually advancing ships. Now, right now, I think that the minimums have to be what would allow us to meet the AUKUS agreements without depleting our own capacity. That would be the general metric that I would use, and there's a lot of variables that go into that. But we're very much behind, Hugh, as you well know, and so that needs to be where we invest in our own industrial base here at home. That's the way I think about it. I do think there's a role for government to play a role in making sure that that happens far more quickly. I would like to see us on a path quickly in my first term to getting to 4% of GDP as the new floor, at least for the next now through 2032 as the base for U.S. military spending as a percentage of GDP. And a significant percentage of that does need to go to new naval production. But I use the AUKUS agreement as a benchmark and standard to say, how do we meet those requirements in a way that still ensures that we're not going to deplete our own capacity outside of what we're selling to Australia? And I would go further and say that right now our nadir, particularly naval capacity of being able to take on a conflict scenario in Taiwan, would hit a nadir in 2027 to 2028. I want to make sure that that nadir is pushed out significantly in time by ramping up production and also slowing down the pace of decommissioning ships in the South China Sea. So that's broadly.
So Vivek, I know about AUKUS, but I don't think it gives us a ship count. Have you nailed down a ship count and ship mix yet?
I'm not going to give you a ship count and ship mix. I'm giving you the broad principles, though, that we will bring to bear as we look, and frankly, take the full look at the picture as I take over as Commander-in-Chief as well. But broadly speaking, here are the issues that I see, and the plan is going to be tailored to addressing them. The nadir can't be in 2027 to 2028, as it is with the Divest to Invest program today. And I think that when we enter agreements like AUKUS, committing ourselves to sell certain submarines to Australia, we can't be in a position where we're depleting that capacity. The rate limiter is naval production capacity here in the United States, shipbuilding capacity, and broadly, it is a high priority for me to increase our overall military budget as a percentage of GDP to fill that gap.
That's where I was going.
And we're going to
You're right. We don't have the defense industrial base. Governor DeSantis said that yesterday. Where do you think we can expand shipyard capacity quickly?
I think we can do it in, frankly, all of the areas where we already have it today, but also pick new areas, coastal areas as well. I mean, to think about Virginia, think about California. Yes, let's double down in areas where we can excess build that capacity. But I also think that we can look at opportunities to bring an industrial base to this country where we might need actual capacity that can, I wouldn't use this as a form of economic protectionism, but can also be a source of putting people back to work and even stimulating the economy here at home. I mean, look at
so that brings me back to where we
yesterday.
began. And I'm not going to take you long because your staff was mad at me the last time I took you long. So we got 4 minutes. Chaos in the House will not get you shipbuilding capacity or a defense appropriation. You have to have Congress work. How are you going to get to majorities if the Republicans in the House think chaos is a good strategy? Do you think what Matt Gaetz did advanced the national security of the United States?
I don't think that it long run advances the national security of the United States to not have a speaker in the House. But I do believe in trying to find the silver lining in every opportunity that we're dealt. And so if this spawns, as I hope it does, a serious discussion in the Republican Party, for example, I'll get into one specific detail where I'd like to hopefully see the discussion go, Hugh, is separate the debate about funding Ukraine. And you and I have had that discussion before.
Right. Asked and answered.
What is an urgent need to shore up our own reserves and capacity for defense here at home, our own stockpiles, our own defense industrial base, our shipbuilding capacity. Let's separate those discussions. And I think we can find far more unity in the Republican Party if we don't commingle those issues. So what I want to talk about is the what. What's important? Protecting the homeland right now is vitally important. We are badly behind on missile defenses, cyber defenses, super EMP attack defenses. Think about basic defense of our border. And yes, think about our defense industrial base, which, by the way, to tie this to an earlier discussion we had, depends on China to build F-35s or anything else in this country. It is ridiculous that we depend on our adversary to do it. I think if we see the issue with that clarity, rather than commingling it in large combined bills that tie that to spending to Ukraine, then I think we can find common ground and consensus in the Republican Party, within the Republican Party, where even if there's diverse views on Ukraine, we can actually find commonality on what is actually most vitally important to protect our own defenses here at home, to fortify our own defenses here at home.
Last question, Vivek.
That's part of the path for how we rebuild a majority with consensus that governs and, most importantly, protects the homeland and our own industrial base here.
I have 2 minutes, and you can take as long as you want on this last question. It's the most commonly posed question to me by texters about you. If you think Donald Trump is the best president of the 21st century, why are you running it? These are obviously Trump supporters. They want to know why you're draining an already major lead away from Donald Trump. How do you answer that, Vivek? Why run against Trump if he was such a good president?
So I do think he's a good president on the facts. He kept us out of war, and he's also a president who saw an oversaw a very successful economy. I have to acknowledge that, and I think it's a mistake that the other candidates aren't. However, I have something that he doesn't. I'm young. I have fresh legs. I'm 38 years old. I believe it will take somebody whose best days in life are still yet ahead, and I hope that's true for me. I don't take that for granted. But I think it will take somebody whose best days in life are still yet ahead to see a country whose best days are still ahead of itself. And Hugh, because I'm a member of a different generation, I think I can reach the next generation who is badly lost in the United States today. Young people are in search of purpose and meaning, hungering to be part of something bigger than themselves, yet cannot even answer what it means to be an American. And yes, I believe I can reach that next generation. 60% of young Americans say they would sooner give up their right to vote than to give up their access to TikTok. 25% recruitment deficit in the U.S. military just last year. Less than 16% of Gen Z says they're even proud to be an American. When I look at that next generation, my two sons and their generation, who is best equipped to reach them? I think that's me, Hugh. That's my responsibility. I think that's the most important responsibility, actually, of the next president over the next 8 years in office, is reviving that national identity, that sense of national character, national pride in the next generation. And yes, because I am a member of a different generation, because I am a millennial, I have a responsibility and an ability to do that. You look at how we're doing it on this campaign already. That's the example I want to set. And what I'll tell everybody in the country who's looking at supporting me is this. When I'm in that office, I think it's been a long time since we've had a president who we can look our kids in the eye and tell them, I want you to grow up and be like him. That's the standard I want you to hold me to. As the father of two young sons, when I leave office in January 2033, my two sons won't even yet be in high school. So yes, I think about not what I want to say on day one as the destination. My destination is January 2033 when I leave office after 2 terms. All the things I want to do, from shutting down the administrative state to growing the economy to declaring economic independence from China. Yes, those are things I want to get done. But the most important thing I want to do, I want to say what Reagan said when he left office in January of 1989, that we revived a national character that we now lack in this country today. And reaching and inspiring and motivating young people is a key part of reviving that national character. And so because I have fresh legs, I think I am the best positioned candidate in this field to do it, even though I will honor Donald Trump and his legacy at every step of the way, because that's the right thing to do. That's how we reunite this party, and that's how we reunite this country.
The website is Vivek 2024. Thank you for spending. You went 2 minutes over, Vivek, but that's not my. You did that. I didn't do that. Thank you, Vivek. Keep coming back.
Thank you, Hugh. I appreciate it.
Thank you.